What's going on, guys? It's your hobby, David StclairSpeaks, and you are now tuned in to the StclairSpeaks Show.
You are now tuned in to the StclairSpeaks Show.
Welcome back to the StclairSpeaks Show podcast. I'm your host, Yahavi St. Clair. We have an incredible guest in the building today. We're sitting down with Dr. Pierre McDonnaugh. He is a Connecticut licensed attorney, an accomplished author of Beauty for Ashes, a self-proclaimed professional failure, an insightful perspective on how failure is an integral part of the process of learning and becoming of true whole selves. Through his inspiring words, he challenges us to embrace failure and use it as a stepping stone towards success. See how I messed up on the intro? I'm gonna use that as a little stepping stone. But I want to welcome you, Pierre, to the show. Please give our listeners a 3 to 5 minute introduction on yourself, your brand, your business, and the inspiration behind this book.
Thank you very much. Yes, you said it correctly. It's kind of a strange phrase, professional failure. It's more a testament to my own life experience. The book itself was kind of like a way I could share my experiences with others and the things that I've learned along the way through my shortcomings, all the different lessons that I learned through my own personal failings that I refer to as the different principles of failure, virtues of failure, for lack of a better phrase, is the one I call it in the book, of which there's a number. Just basically try to categorize into different buckets the lessons that I learned, going from playing sports as a kid to academic pursuits, time in the military, things like that. And throughout the book, I tell little stories about my own exploits in all these different venues, and where I kind of just messed up. And when I was younger, I sort of looked down on myself. I was a bit harsh on myself frequently. And I think that was my biggest mistake. I should have been a lot more kind. I didn't feel that I had the support that I had, and it kind of led me down the road that I went, and I was able to spin it around and make good out of it. So that's what this is all about.
See, now that point is it's so relatable. Before we started recording, I was telling you I was just like pre-prepping, and the more I was reading up on the book, I'm like, man. I could really relate to this book. So I want to stay on the topic of this book real quick. So you write about the importance of embracing failure and viewing it as a necessary part of the process of learning and growth. Could you share with us, maybe like a short personal story of an example of how you applied that principle to your own life?
I would say early on, there are a number of things. I was a normal kid. Growing up in New York in the 70s, immigrant parents on Long Island. And I feel like I had 2 older brothers, and I think I just got mixed up in the pecking order, in the sense that the experiences that I'd gone through were nothing unique to me, whether I was successful or smart. It was more, of just by virtue of being the youngest, I was the weakest, the slowest. I wasn't as good as everyone else. And I was always trying to measure up. So I had developed over time this kind of false sense of self, false sense of reality. And I felt like I was never good enough. And I think without the support that you would ordinarily get from parents and mentors and community leaders and things like that, which we didn't have. My mother was a single mother, worked all the time. Dad wasn't, he lived not too far away, but he wasn't a regular presence. So it was more having to encourage myself, which I clearly didn't do as a young age. I think I bonded with my shortcomings rather than achievements. And over time, I just accepted the fact that I just wasn't good at anything, not realizing that I was just a kid. I was becoming something, as we all are. And I think that the leadership around us, whether it's parents, neighbors, you name it, should encourage as well, and remind us that we're not going to be born good at something. We become good. We're constantly beings becoming something else. And I think that when we do that, we create a safe space so that we can grow into that space and become our full selves. And I didn't have that. I didn't have that until I actually got into the military. And it was kind of beaten into me in basic training that I was as good as anyone else. And I think from there, things started to loosen up a little bit. I started giving myself a break. I was also pretty religious at the time. And I think a little bit of that seeped in as well. And things just gradually started turning around from a self-awareness standpoint. I just started seeing things differently. I'm trying to think a particular story. There's a few that I mentioned in the book. There's one I think that's pretty funny. My brother was this super overachieving, really smart guy who was constantly winning awards and just knocking it out of the ballpark. And there was a period where at graduation, and right at the end, he had won all these awards he accumulated throughout the course of the evening. And right afterwards, almost like a celebrity, there was a crowd around him. My mother, my father, myself, we're all standing there. The teachers were running over, congratulating. And we had one teacher that was the same. And she came over to talk to my family. And I was taller than everyone else, so I'm standing in the background. And she kept looking at me because I was in her English class. So she's looking at me like, what are you doing here? Like, what is it? Can I do something for you? And then I laughed and I pointed and I said, I'm with them. And she looked shocked. And she's like, you're from the same family as him? And it was the funniest thing because my father looked like he wanted to strangle me or punch me or something because he was so ashamed of me. But it's like these kinds of experiences that just, always feeling on the periphery, always feeling not good enough, things like that, and not having the support and reinforcement to let me know, to create that space that I was becoming something. Maybe it was taking me a little longer, but I was becoming something and I had to be patient with myself. And that's what I learned. That's one of the virtues of failure I have in the book. I talk about patience. Another one is self-awareness, where you fit in the pecking order. Another one is that all wins are not winning. Sometimes you got to take a loss to get ahead, to move forward. Courage to walk away, things like that.
It's funny because as you were telling that story and you're diving into it, the first thing that comes to my mind is representation matters, right? And the importance of that. And you talk about the pecking order and actually seeing, this is what excites me. And I was telling you, I was really excited for this interview because that representation of seeing someone that looks like me with doctor in front of his name, like that is really inspiring and people could pull from that. So now you're on the other side. What is that like for you being that representation?
Well, a number of, as I came along, I was in Oakland, California, right after I'd gotten out of the military. I stuck around the area and I was out at Travis Air Force Base out near Davis. I moved in a little bit. I was living in San Leandro, which is right outside of Oakland. And it was a time where I started coming out. I became, my early years, I was a stockbroker at Smith Barney. And big things started happening for me, and I wanted to share that. So I joined this group called Choices. It was this nonprofit that we created to go and speak with schools and do a kind of mentoring outreach. And it kind of took on the shape where I just wanted to spread this message. I wanted to share with other people, kids, that like, if I did this, if anybody does this, you can do this. And if I did this, you can do this. I can tell you exactly what I went through to get to this point. It's not easy. It starts with sort of soul searching and doing a little bit of personal transformation in terms of your sense of self. I also was involved shortly thereafter. I moved back east with 100 Black Men of New York. And it was, again, me trying to say, look, how can I get this message out? At the time, I was still a broker. This was just before I got back. I went to law school at Howard University. And I just have always, either through church organizations or nonprofit organizations, tried to sort of share this message. And I think what led me in the direction of the book was I felt like I had personally witnessed that, having these level conversations with individuals was life-changing. A number of people whose lives went in different directions after encountering me and having these conversations and relationships with me. And I said, it's like one at a timing it. I'm getting older. I'm not getting any younger. And this one at a timing it thing isn't working. So I said, what if I could just dump some of my perspective, some of the mechanisms and philosophies and things that I relied on to change myself, where I could speak to a lot of people at the exact same time rather than one person. And that's what made me say, well, why don't you just put it down in a book and distribute it and have many people look at it, not just one person. And then 2 years later, one person. That was the whole idea, was how do I speak to as many people as possible? And that's sort of how I incorporated this into how in my life.
All right, man, that's good, man. That's good stuff. So the professional failure. Tell us more about the professional failure and how has that impacted your career? And you're wearing it, and you mentioned also something. You said sometimes you have to take the L.
Yeah.
Right. Talk to us about that, because when you say that in professional failure, I'm like, it makes sense. So tell us about that.
Well, the thing is, a bit tongue in cheek on the professional failure, but it's just my way of saying that I've embraced the fact that every time you go out and you dive into the deep end of the pool, you're gonna inhale some water. You're gonna struggle a bit, and you can't let that hold you back. And a lot of people will brag about how they've never fallen short with anything, but to them, I always say it's because you never really pushed yourself that hard. You didn't really try, because when you try, you suffer and you struggle, just even if it's just a little bit, because none of us are that great right out the box. We like I say, we aspire, we grow into what we're meant to be. And there's always going to be this kind of space between where we are and where we're going. And that reach factor is the thing that keeps us engaged and motivated. So when I say professional failure, it's just me trying to communicate as well as get comfortable with that gap, with that reach space, where there's always going to be some striving and some struggling and some shortfalling. And I'm okay with that. So the mere fact that I'm okay with that, I say, you know what? That's my skill. That's my superpower, is that I'm not afraid to try and aspire to things greater than where I am right now. How that has reflected in where I've become. When I applied to go to the doctoral program at Pace University, I had no idea what was going on, what I was getting involved in. I just knew where I wanted to be. And I knew that stepping out and trying to do that next move was going to be a huge jump. And I had no idea what was going to happen. I knew it was going to cost me. It was going to cost me money, time, energy, but I was going to do it because I wanted to go somewhere. And getting banged up like that, that's exactly what I'm referring to. And I did it. And my mother used to say, where there's a will, there's a way. And that seems silly and, like a cliche, but it's not until you actually live on the edge like this, on the outer periphery, that you know what that statement really means. And it means literally you're diving out there with nothing to land on, with the knowledge that I'm going to hit something and I'm going to hang on to it for dear life, and I'm going to scramble my way forward, and I'm going to keep going. And when you start doing it, you start understanding. There's a phrase I use in the book, all knowing is doing and all doing is knowing. And it's almost like people will say, oh yeah, I know. No, you don't. Not until you actually threw yourself out there. You felt the adrenaline, you took the loss, you felt the pain, and you got over to the other side. That's when you know.
Yeah. Ooh. Preaching the word, man. Hold on. We're gonna clap it up real quick. All right. So I got a good amount of questions for you today. So I want to talk to you about this, right? As someone who has a background in both law and economics, how do you see these two disciplines intersecting in the context of financial regulation?
Well, you pretty much just described it. That's literally where you see that the nexus between the two primarily is in financial regulation. You also see it in my particular discipline, which was trade policy, or any kind of policy for that matter, because I used to be a regulatory policy analyst for FINRA, the financial regulator for securities markets. And I also, now I have continued, I think over the last 20 years, worked in various banks negotiating trading contracts and agreements for derivatives. So you regularly see this nexus between economics and finance. It's like a huge area, and there's a lot going on. Like in my dissertation in trade policy, had a lot to do with what happens, trade modeling, like what happens with Brexit, for example, if a country pulls out of a trading bloc, or what happens if you go to a free trade scenario and reduce taxes and tariffs on goods coming in and out of the country to the welfare of the people living in that country. And there are a number of predictive analysis and models that are used to understand what would happen. One of my big frustrations around Brexit was that I didn't think, especially being in England, we were getting fed real information to make solid, rational decisions. It was all about a lopsided discussion about racism against, Eastern Europeans being forced out of the country and things like that. But there was nothing else about the welfare of English people, or what the economic impact was going to look like at the end of the day. And it's not magic. These models exist. I did it for my dissertation. I know people can use these predictive models to determine outcomes, and then they turn around and use those outcomes to fashion economic policy, and policy being sort of laws and regulations and things like that. So this is where you see the nexus between these two disciplines come together. Just two examples. There's many other examples if you really dig.
It's powerful right there. Of course, in your opinion, what are the most important qualities that someone needs to possess in order to be successful in the banking and the financing industry, in terms of just the younger generation coming up now?
You said the most important quality or characteristic.
The most important qualities that someone needs to possess in order for them to succeed in banking and finance.
I would say integrity. I mean, I laugh, and I mentioned this example in the book about how I hated math growing up. As an adult, I realized I didn't hate math. I just don't feel like I was educated properly and introduced to the subject properly now, looking back and giving myself more credit. But as a person who's not really big on that, I find it funny and ironic that I've spent my entire life since I was practically 20 years old working in banking. And in that time, I think the most valuable characteristic was integrity, showing up on time, being contextually and situationally appropriate. And what I mean by that is, and I'm not criticizing anybody, but tattoos on your face and neck and all this kind of stuff. And, the bottom line is, as much as there's nothing wrong with that, nobody cares who you are when you come into their place of business. They just need you to do what you do. It's almost like in the early days, it's a pay for service environment. And literally, you're like a laborer. Now, as you go on in that environment and develop skill and expertise, now you're like what they would call augmented labor or human capital. Now you got something to trade and talk about and have an opinion. But in those early days, it's just pay for labor. So you can't come in there being a distraction. You can't say, this is where I come from and this is what we eat and this is how we do, because they could care less. They're not interested in joining your club. You want to join their club and get paid. And maybe you can take that pay back to where you come from and make a big difference. But you got to get paid first. And that means you got to learn to move in and out. I think they refer to that as coding. You have to move in and out of different situations, because just because yours is important to you, it's not important to everybody. So I'm not saying that stop being who you are, but I'm saying you got to leave who you are at the door and, live your offer while you're in that place, and have an integrity and a consistency and a responsibility about yourself, and sort of put your best foot forward. And then you can, at the end of the day, pick yourself back up and go back home again and be you.
Yeah, no, that's it. You gotta leave you at the door.
Basically.
Yeah. Oh, spot on. Integrity is everything. Everything. So there's questions that always come up through the conversation, the interview, and I'm always here for it. So I want to talk to you about something, a very, very hot topic, I would say. Something, of course, dear to me. Of course, I'm a Black man. Being a Black man in business, being a Black man in America, London, or wherever, right? In your opinion, what is the biggest misconception as a black man? Because what I'm seeing is, again, we talked about this a little earlier. We talked about representation. So I'm not gonna lie to you, man. Whenever I got a black guy that comes on my show, and I'll say this on air, I make sure I'm on time, fresh haircut. I do a little GQ outfit because that representation is so important. So from the business side, what is the biggest misconception from you as a black man?
Well, when you say misconception, you mean in the environments that I'm in about me, or what I misconceive about the environments?
Yeah, the environment, more so about you, like just like how you mentioned this, like you said, you've been doing this since you were 20, since you're younger. Is like that transition, like what has that been like for you, and what have you learned, I guess, along the way in terms of any misconceptions that have come up, maybe, or teachable moments?
Well, I would say that I was lucky, because the first thing you're going to notice is that you're going to be regularly, and I don't, having been doing this for some time, I'm not as in touch with the entry level experience. But for me, when I was entry level, there was no black people. And I started out, I was in the Air Force. Back in the 80s, the Air Force was largely white. The Army was mostly black and in between. So it was rough. So this idea of representation almost didn't exist. I get out of the Air Force, I'm working in banking and broker dealers, all white. And then I get, to law school. I get fortunate enough to go to Howard, which was an amazing experience because it's all black. But I felt like as soon as you flip around and go back out there again, it's all white. And, and that means law firms, banks, broker dealers, you're always the only one or one of two. And one misconception I would say is, and this comes from a lot of my friends and people that I have associated with over the years, we regularly want to know and make at the top of our priority representation. We'll go into an environment and we'll be like, how come there's no black people? And like Spike Lee, the movie where it's like, how come you got no brothers on the wall? It's kind of like that, because it's not your store. It's like I'm out of 72 brokers at Smith Barney in Midtown Manhattan. There were 2 black ones, myself and this guy Keith Thomas, whose dad used to be the president. I think he was the first black president of Ford Foundation. He was a broker with me. The 2 of us were the only 2 blacks out of 72, and that's just what it was. Now, we couldn't sit there and fight that fight. We had to become successful and prove that we earned our keep there, and we were able to keep up with all these other guys. There was a contingent of guys that it was near the Diamond District in Midtown Manhattan, and there was a group that represented that area, Hasidic Jews, and there was about maybe 20 of them, and then there was just everybody else in the office was white, and it was just me and this other guy who was black, and we just had to make it sink or swim. They put a thing on the wall of production, and everybody's number was up there, and you just had to keep your number off the bottom or you got fired. I got into law firms, same thing. So I couldn't walk around caring about who in here is black and who isn't black, because I was the one, right? So now what I could do with that is turn around and make a difference. So when I was in 100 Black Men, that's where I went, and I was able to be around my people. But at the same time, this was back when David Dinkins was mayor. He was a member. Johnny Cochran was a member. Rangel was a member. It was a bunch of heavies in New York at the time that were members of this organization. And I remember I had a picture on my desk with David Dinkins, and it used to scare the hell out of these people. And it made me laugh because I was like, oh, this is how this works. Like, you got to belong to your own, and then they respect you. But if you're not connected to anything, because you can't do it alone. So when they see that you're connected to something else, and they respect that thing, they respect you. It's like institutional power against institutional power. And I think that's one of the things that have kept me around for so long, is that I've always been affiliated with some sort of community organization or trying to make a difference. And that put me in contact with the right people within the community. So I didn't need to work with them or be with them. I was able to sort of be the representation that I wanted to see in the world, for lack of a better term. And then from me, I could bring in other people. And from them, they could bring in other people. You get what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
I couldn't just walk in almost like, what do y'all got for me? The answer is nothing.
Oh, yeah. Man, that's deep. And you kind of you actually just touched on what my next question was, because I was just going to ask you, how are you staying up to date with the latest developments in your field and like your resources? And you just mentioned organizations, etc.
Um, well, there's a number. Right now, I'm working in a big German bank here in London, and I just pretty much started on a permanent basis. And they have tremendous resources in terms of keeping you apprised of what's going on in the market from a regulatory standpoint. I'd say what brought me here and what's been going on for the last 10 years is what I would call a regulatory contingency, legal and regulatory contingency. So it's been really an important big time for lawyers from the compliance, regulatory, and legal area, because a lot of firms since 2008 financial meltdown and subsequent new regulations like MiFID and Dodd-Frank and EMIR and some of these other financial regulations have changed the way banks need to behave and do business. So there's like a constant barrage of regulatory legal changes that are being made. And now all of a sudden, these firms relying heavily on their legal people. So it's been a really good opportunity for me to not only be in the industry, make money, advance my career, but also understand what some of these changes mean. So there's no shortage of information. Now, as far as it goes with the community, each of these organizations have various commitments to what they call D&I, diversity and inclusion and things like that, that I try to stay close to and involved in and participate in, where they highlight organizations' activities, community outreach of their minority populations in these banks. So in these ways, I'm still able to sort of, mostly what that looks like is reaching out to young people and trying to give them inroads to getting opportunities in these organizations. One real quick thing is that it's interesting in the UK because you have mostly Nigerians, Ghanaians, a small handful of Caribbean. Here, it's a different situation in the United States. In the United States, you got Black people. over here, you don't have that self-identification like we have in the US. So they have unique problems, but they don't handle it like we do. So they don't see themselves as Black people. They don't self-identify like we do. So it's more challenging to sort of have that commonality when it comes to some of the issues that they're confronted with. The commonality when you're trying to, create diversity and inclusion programs, because you almost have to call yourself something, and they see this as kind of like a badge of dishonor to be associated with that to some degree. And I have conversations with people where I try to get them to understand that when you look at historically from our perspective in the US, it makes sense. Like taking a knee was funny. People here at soccer matches were like, that's stupid, Black people. But they were disassociated or disconnected with the roots of that whole thing, right? Like, wait a minute, this guy was like, I'm not saluting the flag that disrespects me and denigrates my people. But here they don't, it's different. So they're like, what are you talking about? So there are these weird disconnects where diversity and what it means to be Black and, these kind of self-identification measures are completely different that people need to be sensitive to.
I want to ask you, what excites you most about what you do? This should have been the first question, but what excites you most about what you do?
I don't know, because I would have to say that there's a degree of responsibility. There's a degree of autonomy. I learned years ago about a distinction between freedom and autonomy. We put a lot of too much energy on freedom. The problem is there's no opportunity in freedom. You're free to eat out of the garbage if you want. Autonomy says you actually have a sense of mission and purpose, and you can, and the wherewithal to carry that out. Oftentimes, autonomy comes through your alignment with organizations. That's what even marriage as an institution grants you a degree of autonomy in society that being free and single doesn't sometimes. And I think that, any opportunity that operates at the level that I'm at now. I mean, going to law school is a lot like getting a doctoral degree as well as getting a doctoral degree. But when you're operating at that level, like if I was a doctor or a lawyer or any of these things, I'm sure I would have the same level of autonomy that I enjoy now. But that, I think, is what's the most important part of this. And a lot of times people refuse to commit to what they have to commit to get to this point, to have the autonomy, and they don't enjoy it for that reason. And they don't realize that they've deprived themselves, because it's through commitment you get to this level, to these different institutions, as in Howard University, institutions like PACE, places where you actually have to meet them halfway, do your work, and then they sort of set you loose on society to go and creatively do whatever you need to do. And I think that's what I enjoy about law. And the other thing I think I enjoy about law was the way that we learned about it from Howard. I found was really interesting, because if I'd gone to any law school, I would have been learning about the right to privacy and things like that in the Constitution. But like in constitutional law at Howard, we were learning about the slave amendments and the 13th, 14th, and 15th and how it impacted Black people. So then all of a sudden you start connecting the legal infrastructure with our rights, with the way society is shaped, the way we've been treated, how we've, the opportunities we have, and you get a whole new insight into what's going on. And I really appreciate my legal education for giving me that as well. But again, all these things I just chalk up to the degree of autonomy I have and responsibility I have, and to be able to just go out there and the volition to kind of create and do whatever I want to do, and the wherewithal to be able to do that. That I think is what's most interesting about where I'm at and what I'm doing.
Mm. All right, so
I hope these aren't too weird, these responses.
No, you're good. No, okay. You're good. You're good, man. You're good.
Rein me in if I get too strange with it.
No, you're good, man. Hey, I gotta let you do your thing. I'll let you cook, man. When you're cooking, and it's good. It's good. We'll let you keep cooking. So I want to swing back to the book, Beauty for Ashes. I don't know. I don't think I asked you this before, but when you write a book like this, who is this book for? What do you want readers to take away from reading the book? Because here's the thing, you probably hear this all the time. You've seen this all the time. People pick up books all the time, but sometimes they don't apply what they read. Can you talk to us about what you want them to take away from the book and actually applying the lessons learned from the book as well?
I would say, for me, what Beauty for Ashes represents, first of all, the title. I drew it from the Bible. And honestly, I was listening to T.D. Jakes, and he was telling the story about, I want to say it was Solomon's temple, and it was and how it was built and how it came to be, and the story in the Bible that talks about the family, and it was through apparently the prior generations' shortcomings and failings, and the rubble and the ashes and the sort of the destruction of that previous generation and within a particular family, that brought about the circumstances for current things to take place, current opportunities and I saw that in my own life. And it's easy, and understanding that helped me climb out. I had to understand that and appreciate everything that came before me had a role to play in the opportunities that were in front of me. And if I wasn't aware of that, didn't understand that, it can hurt you in the long run in terms of your perspective and sense of self, and your sort of emotional strength and awareness. And I just wanted to share this idea that it was through the various when I was in the military. I was married. I have two twin sons. They're older now. One of them was in the Peace Corps in Gambia for a few years, and the other one lives over in Charlotte. When they were babies, their mother died. She committed suicide, and I talk a little bit about it in the book. And it was very chaotic when I was 19, 20 years old, and I ended up with twins in the 80s, which was a crazy time. for anybody, but anybody from New York in particular. And here I am, this single father with these two kids. I didn't finish school, and I had no idea what I was going to do. So I went back to New York, and I had to regroup. And it was just one problem after another, and I had to sit down and decide, like, am I going to define myself by these problems, or am I going to create a way out for myself? And that's exactly what I did. So when I look at this book, it was just kind of like, these are the ashes for me. I've always processed religion this way. Like, I look at it as a living word. I look at it like, I'll hear a story, but the question becomes, what does this mean for me? How does this relate to me? I feel like the messages that you see, the spiritual messages that we see, have to translate into our daily living and make it come alive in that sense. And I realized that in that way, that's exactly what was going on with me. I could sit and feel bad and, woe is me, or I could say, something, this reminds me of, Solomon's temple in the Bible and what happened there, and with Jacob and so on and so forth. And then I could relate, and I can use the solutions that they used in my own life and see if it works. And it did. So to me, that's kind of how what this was all about, was sharing that story. And also why I called it Beauty for Ashes, because my life today is a far cry from where I started out, but I don't know if I would have gotten here if I wasn't standing on those ashes. Some people might say to me, oh, it was easy for me, I just went straight there. Well, they had a whole different set of circumstances, and I challenge anybody who thinks everything's wonderful. If they look hard enough, they'll find out that they have their own challenges and struggles. But it's one thing if you're consciously aware enough to own and admit, and another thing if you're just going to coast along and act like everything either is somebody else's problem or it was all easy for you. Some people's parents laid everything out for them, but then they don't have those challenges. They don't have the depth of enjoying their life. It's that feeling of something missing. And what that is getting your hands dirty, dealing with life, making the things turn out the way you want them to be, and looking to yourself to provide satisfaction. So I tried to explain the mechanisms as much as I could. Like I say, the things that I clung to and understood as I was evolving over the years in this book, under that theoretical framework of that piece of scripture found where God promises beauty for ashes.
Man, that's some good stuff, man. Oh man, so please, because I know we're winding down. We're gonna sum up this this interview. Where can we get a copy of the book?
At Fulton Books, which is in Pennsylvania. I can provide you the link if I haven't already done it. There's a link that takes you straight to where it's accessible. I believe it's also in the press release. You have it?
I'll put it in the show notes.
But it's fultonbooks.com.
Nice. Yeah, man. I'm gonna need a signed copy of that. I need a signed copy. It's funny because once I seen that you coming onto the show, I'm like, oh, you're an author too. I have a library. I kid you not. Every guest that's an author that's been on the show, I have a signed copy of their book. I got to add yours to the collection, and I'm also gonna gift this one because this is, when you talk about the book, right? This is also a good gift to someone as well. People don't really talk about the importance of gifting a book, and you need that. You also reference you was talking about TD Jakes, and talking about faith and all this other stuff. People need to hear that.
Yeah.
Oh man, some good stuff. Like I always say, for the listeners especially, what good is information if you don't apply it? Apply what you've learned today. Get a copy of Pierre's book. I'm going to drop the link in the show notes, so you can click the link directly. It'll take you directly to Fulton Books.
Fulton Books,
and you could snag a copy. Man, this was fun. One thing I really did enjoy about this, and I'll just add one last thing, is when I hear someone talk about their story, and this is what it's all about. This is the whole importance of this podcast, about stories that inspire. When I asked you earlier, and I believe my first or two questions. Is there like a story? And you told the story towards the end, and I appreciate you telling the story towards the end. A father, twins, raising them on your own. Um, just the pain, like not knowing the Lord directing your steps, like all of it. That's the story, and I love that, man. I love that because when I talk, and I mentioned this a little earlier too, on what that other side looks like. Here we are, and stories that inspire. Because man, if you could overcome that and pull from that at that young age, man, there's kids right now. There's someone 19
I
mad that
know.
they got one like on TikTok. You know what I'm saying? you know.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're saying. Rather than twins at 19 and no education, and it was crazy time. But I want people to know that once you set your mind to it, just do it. You know, it's one quick last thing I'd like to say is when you mention an author too, was when I started thinking, I want to write a book. I want to tell this story. I said, you know, one day I want to be an author. And I kept saying that to myself. I want to become an author. And then it hit me and I said, you are whatever you say you are. No one tells a fox to be a fox or a bear to be a bear. You just are. And I was like, if I want to be an author, I declare that I am. And I just started writing. And I think that's how anything happens in society is you are it because you chose to be it. And that's hard for people to understand. But in my life and looking at all the things that I've done, every single one of them, I stood up one day and I said, I choose to be this right now. With no help, no nothing. I just got up and did it. And that's the takeaway I want people to understand is that whatever you want to be, it's your decision to just choose to be that now.
Yes. As a man thinketh, so is he.
That's right.
Yes. And with that being said, I will catch you in the next episode.